Time to get started. So welcome everybody. We are thrilled to have our first ever virtual advocacy day for arts and culture. Woohoo! I am Sue Hildick and I have the pleasure of being the senior advisor to the Cultural Advocacy Coalition. And we are small but mighty, and we so appreciate all of you coming today to lend your voice to more public support for arts and culture. Normally we would be gathered together, and we had reserved the rotunda of the Capitol 2 years ago for today, but plans change, and we're anything but, we are totally adaptive. So here we are. And the nice thing about Zoom is it really does unite us from all corners of the state. And it's lovely to see everybody this morning. So we have a program this morning of about 2 hours where you'll hear from some of our leadership. You'll hear some amazing music. You'll have some advocacy tips given from a panel, including our board members and lobbyists and a citizen advocate. And we will be going through our priorities and giving you the talking points for your meetings this afternoon. Hopefully you've been able to set some up with legislators. And if you haven't, they don't all have to happen today. You can take the tools and still reach out next week, and we would be happy to help you with that. We will have board members coming in and out because we have some meetings already happening this morning. There's one at 9 o'clock with Representative Manning. So things are moving. So with that said, I'd like to introduce you to two of our leaders. J.S. May serves as our president, and his day job is executive director of Artists Repertory Theater. And Isaac Marquez serves as our vice president, and he oversees our capital construction process this year. His daily pursuit is as the cultural services director for the city of Eugene. And we're gonna begin with Isaac.
Thank you, Sue. Good morning, everyone. Say, of all the professional networks out there in the world, I really couldn't be prouder than to be a member of this one, to be a peer of yours, to be associated with people who find immense purpose in their work, and to be part of a network who champions Oregon's arts, culture, and humanities. Before we jump into our program, the Cultural Advocacy Coalition wants to begin our day by paying respect. We would like to acknowledge the many tribes and bands who call Oregon their ancestral territory, including Burns Paiute, Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua and Siuslaw, Confederated Tribes of Cow Creek, Lower Band of Umpqua, Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Confederated Tribes of Umatilla Indian Reservation, Coquille Tribe, and Klamath Tribes. We honor the ongoing relationship between the land, plants, animals, and people indigenous to this place we now call Oregon. We recognize the continued sovereignty of the 9 federally recognized tribes who have ties to this place, and thank them for continuing to teach us how we might all be here together. Thank you. So before we dive in this morning, we also want to say a few words about the important work we are all supporting. We know the cultural sector is a financial engine that's on standby to fulfill its role in economic recovery. However, the shuttering of venues and loss of cultural events due to the pandemic, overlaid with calls to action for social justice, have reminded us of the important role artists and arts organizations play in community life. Theaters, museums, and art spaces are among the last true melting pots in our society. Participation crosses political affiliation and ideology. The Community Arts Center strives to be a place where all are welcome, and few ever leave unaffected by the resonance of the art they seek. So many of us here on this call show up every day and remain poised, professional, and driven, regardless of what the future holds. One of those people is Dana Whitelaw, Executive Director of the High Desert Museum and CAC board member. Dana, I hope you don't mind me sharing this story. 2 weeks ago, I asked Dana to help identify the essence of our work. Why are we important now? Why do the arts matter in this critical moment with all that is going on in the world? And without skipping a beat, Dana shared this insight. First responders and frontline workers have taken on the pandemic in heroic ways. The arts and culture sector are second responders and the facilitators of our healing from both the pandemic and inequities brought forward by the social justice movement. There is no other sector that can help mend our hearts and souls or help us begin to make sense of the world around us like the arts. Thank you, Dana, and thank you everyone for joining us today. It is truly great to see you. Sue, I think I turn it over to JS now.
Thank you, Isaac. JS?
Yes, thank you. Before I introduce Representative Christine Drazen, is she on the call yet?
Yes.
She is. So let's go ahead and move right to her then. We are thrilled to have Representative Drazen with us, especially because of her past work as executive director of the CAC. She's a fourth generation Oregonian who represents Canby in the Oregon legislature and is the House Republican leader. She is truly an advocate for the cultural sector, and we're honored to have her with us today. Christine.
Thank you, JS. And it's great. It's really, really great to be here today. I am humbled by the opportunity to come back and speak with so many friends and colleagues from before I started my foray into public service. I would also like to just especially appreciate the words that Isaac shared from Dana. I could not agree more. This year has been extraordinary. And the impacts to our cultural sector have been, I hope not devastating. I see so many here on this call. I am so encouraged. I am thrilled that this is a strong participation and strong showing on this important day. And I think it's a really good sign. So I know it's been a hard year for everybody, and the unique value that the arts bring to recovery and healing, and especially around the challenges that we face as a state and a nation right now, can't be overstated. So thank you, Isaac, for sharing that, and thank you, Dana, as well. So I am just going to lead off with a few thoughts and a few words to you guys. And mostly it's about appreciating you guys and the work that you do and wishing you well in your advocacy today. I agree with you and believe that the legislature should prioritize the work of the arts and culture sector at every opportunity that we've had to be able to advance that mission, whether or not it's through CARES Act funding, emergency board actions. I have continued to do everything that I can to support this sector that I value and really view as critical to our state. In addition to that, as you know, the legislature is focused on disaster recovery, pandemic recovery. We have our kids that aren't yet fully back in school across the state, though we're getting there. We're making progress in that way. But all of this must be done within this virtual world we're living in right now. And virtual government is not something I ever thought that I would see. But I can say that the level of engagement from people has been extraordinary. You know, there have been hiccups along the way. Some of it has been for some of the most controversial issues. It's felt a little inadequate. I think people have felt a higher level of frustration because of some of that. But on the other side, it's inclusive. I mean, we have been hearing from people across the nation engaging in some of the really tricky public policy issues we're tackling inside this building. And with the ease of a click of a Zoom meeting button, they've been able to join us and contribute their substantial expertise and perspective in a way that we might not have had access to otherwise. So there's no doubt that it's been beneficial in many ways to be able to engage with new technologies as we work forward. And today, I hope that all of you guys have very productive meetings with your legislators as you advocate for the priorities of the coalition. We know that the arts promote creativity and innovation and all the ways that they help us and our kids and our communities think outside the box, connect and heal. And this is what we need right now in the midst of this very difficult time. And as we move forward, I hope that you guys will reach out to me and continue to reach out to me on budget issues, policy matters. And I have appreciated the text messages and the folks that have been checking in on their projects and the priorities of the coalition, just to give me a heads up on what you guys are focused on. So I appreciate being here today. I wish you guys all the best, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Representative Drazen. It's so nice to see you and appreciate your work in bringing us to today. You've been a really important part of this coalition. We appreciate you. Now we're going to move back to Isaac to introduce Stephanie McGee. Isaac?
Okay, let me just find the mute button. Okay, unmuted now. All right, we are so happy to have Stephanie McGee back with us this Advocacy Day, as she represents the intersection between art and advocacy. She is a cellist and a CAC member, founder of Art at the Heart. Stephanie is the 2021 Miss Capital City Volunteer and a candidate for Miss Oregon. Stephanie is the driving force behind Oregon's Arts Appreciation Month. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm just going to go right into it if that's okay with everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you, Stephanie. What a great way to start our day. It is a wonderful world. You will hear Stephanie's story on our advocacy panel, but I just want to note it now that she's the driving force behind Arts Appreciation Month, which is April. And the governor, I believe, has declared that 4 times now. So this woman is a whirlwind of success on many, many levels. And we're delighted she's one of our members. Okay, we're going to move into a session led by JS around the CAC and how we are doing as an organization and what our priorities are. JS?
Thank you, Sue. Before I begin the update on the CAC, I just want to also thank Sue Hildick and Jamie Painter, our extraordinary staff who work for us part-time, not full-time, but they do an extraordinary job for us. And this all wouldn't have come together today without their extraordinary efforts. So applause to them. So thank you for your time and devoting to it to advocacy today. You know, it's probably never been more important for us to lobby government. In fact, we have to raise our collective voices. We're eager to tell your stories and support them and deliver our collective messages on the sector's needs. We're nearly 400 organizations from all corners of the state. Federal funding that has flowed through the state is really what has kept us all alive. And without that, many of us wouldn't be here, and yet we've still had closures like what's happened with the Portland Children's Museum. So it's a challenging time for the sector, and we are not out of the woods by any stretch of the imagination. Oregon legislators dedicated the largest number of federal CARES dollars to arts and culture of any state in the country when they allocated $50 million out statewide through the Cultural Trust. The next closest state at that time was Massachusetts at $28 million. So that was really extraordinary. And so it's important that we thank the legislative leaders for that. We've also been actively advocating for more generous reopening guidelines of venues and museums in both meetings and letters with the governor and their staff. We've been actively advocating with the federal delegation on additional recovery dollars to build back better, as President Biden has talked about the jobs plans, on appropriations requests for our capital projects, and on increasing funding for the NEA and the NEH, which are key players for us. We're really trying to internally grow our influence. We're a 501c4, which is a membership organization formed solely to advocate with the donations we raise. We have a small budget of about $100,000 each year, and we operate without a deficit, raising those funds from our members. We're actively growing a federal advocacy presence, and we've been meeting with members of the Oregon congressional delegation recently to open up our communication and share data about the cultural sector here in Oregon. We're actually considering forming a 501c3 also, and many states have both the C4 and the C3 that will create a broader table for our work, and it will allow us to accept foundation grants to increase education, information, and outreach, to spend time on research and development, to come up with our own policy proposals. We think this is essential for the state to ensure that arts and culture organizations are represented at the right tables as folks look to Oregon, to Oregon's economy, our quality of life, and our future strategies for a strong and vibrant Oregon. While membership has remained strong over the past year, we continue to need to bring more organizations to the table. Membership can be secured for as little as $50, and our goal is that every organization that has received a grant from the Oregon Arts Commission or the Oregon Cultural Trust or in federal CARES dollars becomes a member to pay it forward for others by keeping public investment in the arts and culture sector really strong. So we're open to questions now from the from participants if you have questions about this whole sort of strategy. And Jamie will moderate the chat function as a way to have people called on. So any questions from anyone?
So we have Kate who has a question, so I'm going to ask her to unmute.
Thank you so much. Thank you, JS. My name is Kate Mira, she, her, with Fuse Theater Ensemble, as well as Kate's Theatrics. And one of the things that I heard you say, JS, was that you were working around opening guidelines. And I would like to hear a little more about that, especially in terms of making sure that, especially in relation to how more generous opening guidelines also keep workers and artists and audiences safe.
So it's a great question. There has been a lack of equity between how government has treated the retail sector and churches, and how they've treated venues and performing arts organizations. You know, a grocery store or Costco may operate at 50 or 75% capacity, where the High Desert Museum may only operate at 25%. That to us felt like a huge inequity, because where would you actually perhaps be safer, and where are the protocols in place to manage cleaning and crowds and ticketing and all those kinds of issues that venues have available. So that was one point we talked about. Another point we've talked about with the state government is the lead time that it requires for organizations to open. It's not like we can just say we're opening tomorrow and have programming and artists and concepts in place. So that's another piece that we've talked about. So really it's about how do we get treated similarly to other venues, and then also how do we make sure that we have enough lead time for performing arts organizations and museums and venues all to be able to plan their seasons and move in that direction. Does anybody else from the committee want to add any other points that I've missed?
This is Paul Cosgrove, and I just wanted to say that the involvement of a number of you in those efforts has been instrumental in trying to move this ball forward. It's not been moved as far forward as it needs to be moved, but frankly, without the involvement of many of you on this this meeting, we wouldn't have gotten as far as we have. So we need to keep up the information flow to the governor's office, and thank you for the work you're doing, and there'll be more.
And for those who don't know Paul, Paul's our lobbyist, coach, mentor, and serious smart person who guides us as we deal with government and the state government and driving this process. He and Ginny Lang are instrumental in how we move this agenda forward. And your memberships actually help pay Paul and make this possible. Other questions?
I'll jump in. There's one in the chat from Russell with the Oregon Symphony, one of our board members, which is what next steps should we take if we're unable to get the reopening guidance modified? That might be one.
I think that's Paul. A good one for Paul to answer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think one step is just continuing the drumbeat with more examples of why we should be able to operate safely, more examples of what other states are doing who are also concerned about safety as we are, but nonetheless finding pathways to do things differently. Certainly some of the things, the developments that are happening in California are particularly important. in influencing this state in its decision making, because I just read this morning California touts that it has currently the lowest infection rate of any state in the country. So if they're able at this point to move forward in a different and a better way, we should be too. So as you are working your networks in other states and other locales or in this state, and have ideas of further examples we can give to the governor's office that support our request for greater reopening, please keep feeding them in, because that's what I think will make the difference.
Great. We have another question here from Kate about if we've been working with OSHA on shared healthy opening guidelines. And I think you just touched on that a little bit, but anything else you want to add to that?
Yes, OSHA, we have two sets of guidelines that are imposed on all of us in Oregon. One is OSHA guidelines, which affect how we as employers of musicians and actors and janitors and all sorts of kinds of people who make our organizations operate, how we need to do safe things in order to keep the employees safe. I've not heard, and if I'm wrong, please pipe up at some point, maybe not this right now, but certainly feed that information back in, that the OSHA guidelines that have been imposed have been terribly difficult to meet, in that we were already meeting almost all of those safety protocols with respect to our employees. The biggest problem seems to be the governor's imposition through Oregon Health Authority of guidelines in how we deal with the public, not our employees or musicians or contractors, but the public. But if I'm wrong about that and there are still problems with OSHA guidelines, please let us know.
Great, thank you. We also have a question here from Ginevra, who has her hand up.
Good morning, everybody. Ginevra with the Shed Institute in Eugene. Nice to see everybody. Maybe one comment, and then I do have a question, just a report. Over the last, let's say 10 days, we have done 3 concerts. Our performance hall seats 750. So under the low risk guidelines, we were able to have, let's say 210 people in the hall. And I will tell you that people are desperately hungry to come back for live music. We've also done, prior to those concerts, our pre-concert dinners, and it's the age group probably is from 40 up for the most part. And pretty much everybody at this point is saying, I feel good coming out because I've had 2 vaccines. Now, one of our issues is we are already feeling the pressure because we do a lot of memorials during the year. So one of the arguments that I want to make back to the governor's office is that when we are doing church-like functions and actually have the capacity to seat people in a different way than churches and get them to behave differently, we should be allowed to fall under that guideline doing that. So it's one set of pressures. But it's not just the ramp up that's a problem with this, is that once we've ramped up and put a concert in place, to be told that, well, Thursday you can do your concert, Friday you can't, is really a challenge, that on again, off again. So from the business side of things, that's a real problem. So, but my question is to Paul, and maybe it's premature, but sometime during the call, can you address what actually happens to the thousands of public testimony that got submitted yesterday and online last night? Do they sort those, the written testimony, according to content? How do the legislators actually deal with that on Ways and Means, or other legislators?
You know, that might be a great question that I'd like to defer to our panel discussion about advocacy. But please, if I for somehow reason don't remember to bring that up when we're in that panel discussion, remind me. But that's a great question. Or Sue, being cognizant of time, I thought we maybe needed to move on. If there's time, I'm happy to answer it now. Sue?
There's time. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay. Well, then I'll answer it now. Happy to do so. It actually varies a bit member to member. And when I'm talking about member to member, I mean legislator to legislator. Some legislators are very insistent and comprehensive in their review of all the written testimony. I think we wanted our folks who were having capital projects to do oral testimony as well, because I think that has a different kind of an impact and a more immediate impact, and you actually get to see somebody talking about the project. And that also cues those folks into going to look for the more comprehensive written testimony that may be introduced. But to answer your question more specifically, no, I don't believe staff does sort this. They feel it's too much of a judgment call to figure out how to sort all the various viewpoints that the public submit. But the number of comments on the same general subject, even a cursory view of the written record for legislators who aren't as comprehensive as the ones I just mentioned, will show lots of folks on this general subject, and that does make an impact, even if they don't read every word on every piece of paper. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, last night, in terms of the capital projects that were talked about, we may have been the only one that managed to get, and was a board member, through the queue, because, you know, I was on for the 2 hours and nobody was there. I think Isaac was on, and I know others probably were also. So I think submitting the written part is really valid, because I don't think there's any record that we were on and didn't get invited to speak.
Actually, they do have that record. They have the record of who was there, what their interest was, and their organizational affiliation. In fact, that's more likely to have been reviewed, a cursory review, than somebody reading every word of every piece of written testimony. So even that is useful. They know you were there.
We have one more question from Gwendolyn, and that's, how do the letters of support from senators land with committee? And Gwendolyn, I'm curious if you mean, how do they physically land, or how are they received?
How are they received, and are they, you know, part of the consideration when they're reading all of the written testimonies? Because I don't know, you know, I don't know when they show up in those spaces, and then how are they sussed out when they're doing the reading?
It's sort of a corollary to the last question. In fact, legislators really want to have that kind of input. They're not bothered by it. They're not hassled by it. They prefer to get it. They prefer to know where the people in their communities, where their priorities are. So every piece of that data, as I say, there are some legislators who are more diligent in terms of reading every single word on every piece of paper. Others try to get a general feel and flavor and then dig in more specifically on particular items. But all of it has some impact at some level to all of those folks. So I encourage you all, as there are more of these listening sessions from the Ways and Means Committee coming up this next week for districts, congressional districts 4 and 5, if I recall. And I encourage you to write and sign up to give oral testimony at every opportunity you can. Repetition is very, very helpful.
So can I just sort of talk back to that? So even if it's not our session, to sign up during other sessions to continue to submit our written, if it's already been provided, or?
I would not suggest that people who have already had their congressional district time passed sign up for oral testimony, but the written record remains open through this process. So feel free to submit more stuff in writing, even if your time for your congressional district is passed.
Okay.
And if you have questions about how logistically do that, we can talk about that later. But the written record for all these hearings remains open.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul and Gwen. I just, for the benefit of the full group, want to explain. So Gwen represents one of our capital projects that we'll be talking about in the next panel. but the Maxwell Heritage Interpretive Center is one that she's advocating for. And Genevra's got the Shed Institute. Those are both of our capital projects. We have a list of 11. And so we're trying to make sure that Ways and Means members really understand those projects and hear about them from lots of different vantage points. That's a piece of work that the coalition organizes in lots of ways. We want to make sure that as the legislature is looking at where to spend capital dollars across the state, that they have a healthy list of arts and culture capital projects to invest in. And we've had a lot of success over the years in getting those investments. So that's what's being talked about here. If you're not aware, that you will hear more about it in just a minute. If there are not any more questions, we should move right into that panel. Unless JS, do you have any last words here?
No, let's just move into the panel.
Okay, great. Oh, there's a nice comment before we do that from Judy in the chat. Judy also represents one of our projects, the Oregon Jewish Museum. She said she just met with Senator Hayward, who said that there are no promises, but cautiously optimistic. That's wonderful. We love to hear that. Okay, so now we're going to move into Advocacy 101, and we're going to try to demystify it. And I am so thrilled that sitting on our board is a very seasoned professional lobbyist who's worked on all kinds of wonderful Oregon issues, from higher ed to the business community to telecommunications. I've known her for over 20 years, and she's one of my favorite people. Jenny Lang chairs our policy committee, and that means hosting a 7 a.m. conference call every other Friday to share with our board the developments at both the state and federal level. And Jenny, we're going to let you kick off this session.
Thank you, Sue, and thanks to all of you for being here this morning. We appreciate the time and effort you've devoted to both advocating for arts, culture, and humanities, and for lobbying on specific measures related to arts, culture, and humanities. Lobbying is what we're doing today, and at its essence, lobbying is informing and communicating your point of view. These may seem obvious, but just a few suggestions to start us off before we move on to the panel. Your goal is to provide accurate, timely information. It's the best way to influence on any given issue. Legislators or staff may rely on and repeat what you have said to them because of your expertise, your reputation, and because of who you represent. So how do we go about that? Don't need to tell you this, but I will. Be respectful of the elected official and their staff, because oftentimes the schedule of a legislator will be such that your meeting will be with a staff member. They are often the best conduit for information, so treat them as if you were talking directly to the legislator. Put a human face on the importance of the decision you're asking a member to make, and listen for the story that they may have to tell you. For example, I met with Senator Manning this morning, and it was fun to hear him talk about how excited he was to join his friend, Senator Lou Frederick, in Ashland when the Oregon Shakespeare Festival reopens. And it was also fun to hear him talk about presenting concerts in his retirement space with a friend at the Shed, Genevra, and other venues in the Eugene, Springfield area. So it's a place where you have the opportunity to share the love and healing parts of arts, culture, humanities at a time when we all need that. Keep it simple. What's most important may not be what they've heard from other people or read in a tweet. So be sure to focus on what's really critical for them to hear specifically from you. Finally, have some fun, relax with this. They're people just like you, and they want to know about your views in order to make an informed decision. So let's get on to the panel. We have with us today 4 people who will talk about their own experiences in making the case for arts, culture, humanities in different venues. And hearing from them, after hearing from them, then we'll open it up to questions from you. And I know Paul will probably take another swipe at a couple of the items that have come up so far, but have your questions ready. We'll listen to all 4 and then open it up after that. First of all, Isaac Marquez, City of Eugene Cultural Services Director and also leader of the coalition process for review and endorsement of the capital construction projects. Next, we'll have Stephanie McGee, artist and activist. You've heard the artistic part already, and soon we'll hear the activist part. Ginger Savage, Executive Director of Crossroads Carnegie Arts Center in Baker City, and Paul Cosgrove. So Isaac, why don't you start us off? And here are a couple of things that maybe you can weave in. A little bit about the process that you led on the construction projects and why that is of value to legislators. And then how did you use the coalition's equity lens in considering your slate of projects? And finally, when will this process occur next? So take it away.
You bet. Okay, let's see if I can get to all that. First of all, it wasn't just me. It was a team of people. And Ginny, you were part of that team where you gave us some of the history and background and research that we needed to be really grounded in policy. And then we had varying degrees of experience. I think that the reason we were able to kind of carry forward with this process for capital construction was because of the dedication of all of the team that came together from across Oregon to be on this board. The equity lens was so important. And there was a sense of like, how do we actually evaluate for equity? It's a little bit of it's pretty tricky out there. Things are getting easier as we move forward. And regardless of imagining that we could get it perfect or that any one organization might get their equity statement or proof of equity perfect, we had to try. We just had to start somewhere and start moving forward. And what came back to us was incredible. The work your organization's doing to advance equity and racial justice and social justice overall is really quite phenomenal. I wish, Ginny, we could have a breakout session just to share people's stories. We also saw a difference. Some organizations were at the place of, wanting to put programming forward that expressed issues around equity. Other organizations had equity kind of threaded through their entire organization, from the makeup of their board, to the policies that they guide their decision-making by, to the access they create for their audience members, to the programming they have on stage. And if you have a chance, the organization I learned the most from, and the one we refer to regularly in cultural services, is actually the Portland Art Museum. They have a beautiful equity lens. We've borrowed it. We now are experimenting with it in our work, and it's going pretty well. Did I get to your questions, Ginny? Yeah? Okay, I'll just leave it there to let other people talk here.
There was one point, when will we do the process again, Isaac?
Right, sorry.
After we get this slate through successfully, 2023, it opens up again in 2023.
Thanks, JS. I appreciate that. Stephanie, how can you tell us a little bit more about how you worked on the Arts Appreciation Month and what kinds of skills and colleagues you brought along in that effort?
Yeah, so honestly, getting things declared as certain months is really a quite simple process. It just involves writing the proposal, sending it into the governor's office and getting it approved. But sometimes they don't get approved. And what was very interesting this year is we received a letter back that due to COVID, that a lot of these declaration propositions might not happen because they've been overwhelmed at the Capitol, which we all know is true. They're all got so much going on. But thankfully, even for this year, we received back from Kate Brown that April will be Arts Appreciation Month. And the reason April is Arts Appreciation Month is because Leonardo da Vinci was born on April 15th. And many other states have celebrations either on that day or for the whole month for arts. And it truly kind of depicts a balance between the arts, the sciences, and society, and how Leonardo was not only a talented violinist, but the father of relativity. And that's something that I thought was really important. And when I first started advocating for arts in education, mainly, that's where I first started, was I noticed that a lot of other states had Aprils as Arts Appreciation Month, except us, we didn't. And I really thought that that would be something important, and it could be a platform for everybody to kind of jump off of, that once April rolls around, we all can get together and try to get more involvement in the arts. And I think the reason that this is where I started was because of how I grew up. And in the second grade, I broke my leg and had to drop all my sports. And then I decided to start drawing. And I'm drawing ever since. And what really solidified my love and appreciation for arts in education and arts and culture for all of us was in my senior year of high school. I was taking IB Visual Arts, and I had a classmate named Anna, and she would come in late every single day. Okay, maybe not every day. And she'd always have a bagel sandwich with her. And she was one of the kindest people, most talented artists I've ever seen. And my freshman year of college, she actually took her own life. And I remember deeply that she would tell me that art class was the only reason she came to school. And that really solidified why we need April as Arts Appreciation Month, why we need young adult involvement, why we need programs like this and organizations like this to support those kids who don't feel valued in school. And that's kind of my whole thing, is I try to be more emotional, tug at the heartstrings, and get that involvement for not only people in legislation right now, but also younger people who feel the need and the call to get involved.
Great stories. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Ginger.
Well, hello, everybody. Yeah, hi, Jenny. What's up? What do you want me to talk about?
Well, let's talk about policymakers and legislators and whether they really listen to us, and how you go about building relationship when you're clear across the state from Salem. Go for it.
Yeah. So no, I am. If you're not familiar with where Baker City is, we're about 90 miles from the Idaho border. And so in Northeast Oregon, there are a few places, the thriving metropolises of Adrian and Jordan Valley, that are actually farther away from the Salem than I am. So for me to come and be part of Arts Advocacy Day in its traditional format would be 3 days out of my office, because 2 days of travel and a day on the ground at the Capitol. And so it's often been very hard for people in rural Oregon to advocate. And so I've got to tell a funny story. And I'm going to come at this from the humor. So a couple months ago, I get an email from Sue, and she says, "Hey, Ginger, would you be so gracious as to make the CAC testimonies before the Joint Ways and Means Committee about the Oregon's Arts Commission budget?" I'm like, well, sure. I mean, but, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm like, but I don't know anybody. I mean, I don't have any connections. I'm not J.S. May. I'm not Nancy Golden. I'm not Scott Freck. I just don't have those relationships like they do. And Paul and Jenny are sending me things. And then about 3 days later, Brian Rogers, who's on the call as well from the Oregon Arts Commission, emailed me. He said, would you testify before the Joint Ways and Means Committee about our budget? And at that point, I'm beginning to go, I'm going to be frank, why did they want me? I mean, what did I have to add? I didn't intern for anybody, and I don't know anybody. And I called Paul Cosgrove, Obi-Wan Kenobi of what we do. And I said, Paul, I've got to be direct. Why do you want me? And he said, they hear from people in Portland and Salem and Eugene all the time. It's time you need to have your voice heard, and you represent Baker City, Oregon, and that's just as important. And I realized that this whole, and Christine mentioned it, while I know the legislators hate the Zoom meeting, I know I'm going to be advocating for it as we move forward out of COVID, because it has given me access so that I don't have to shortchange my organization with my time and efforts to be able to advocate. And so if you are LGBTQ, if you are representing a tribe, if you are 3 hours away, make sure you step up and have your voices heard, because I know every time I tell this humorous story. Every time I testify, I always get 2 comments. Usually it's about my name. Everybody had a dog named Ginger. And then I always get the Baker City. I visited Baker City in 1982, and oh, tell me what's been going on, because they just need that new story. And so I will also add one little other thing. Because the way the money is flowing, I assume you have all gotten the message, because you were all out there working to get your PPP, you were working to get your CARES Act dollars from your cities and counties. On May 1st, the American Rescue Plan will drop a ton of money into our counties and to our cities. And I know my county and my city, they don't have a plan, as far as I can tell. And so those local advocacy efforts are critically important right now. Right now, I'm spending more time in local regional issues than I ever have. And so that's where it's critically important that the arts voice gets heard, because now that money is flowing down to them, and we can maybe be able to be at the table for all of that. So I hope that was quick and concise and in my usual off-centered way of talking about things. So Jenny, anything else you need from me?
Right on the mark. Thank you. So back around to Paul. Tell us about what you think the single most effective tool is for a lobbyist. And while you're at it, is there really support? And if so, is it more than an inch deep and a mile wide for arts and culture among Oregon lawmakers?
Thank you, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be here. The most effective tool, I think that's easy. You've just seen an example, a demonstration of that. Somebody who is sincere in their views and passionate about their message and speaks openly, honestly, and with candor. That's the most effective tool. It's a communication style that's not stilted or in a particular mode. It's what's convenient and comfortable for you, because that's what legislators and other decision makers want to hear. They want to hear real people with real ideas spoken in real ways. And so sincerity and passion, I think, are the most effective tools. It also doesn't hurt to do a little bit of homework about the person you're going to speak with, their background. In this age in which a lot of information about a lot of us is available online, it doesn't hurt to do a Google search and check people's Facebook pages and LinkedIn just to find out what their interests might be. Because if you can tie your thoughts into something that you know they're interested in, It's so much better way to communicate. Ginny gave a great example of this earlier on when she talked about her meeting with Senator Manning in the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. He had a hook, an interest in our subject matter from his own experience. And so you can use that in terms of amplifying your message by using that hook, the experience that the person already has. With respect to the support in the legislature for arts and culture, I think it's probably accurately to say it's a mile wide, in that almost everyone in every walk of life has some exposure at some level. Some people, a great deal of exposure, some people less exposure to one or more of the institutions represented by all of you on this phone call. Again, Senator Manning loves to go to the Shakespeare Festival. I expect there are plenty of other people who like that, but there are plenty of other people who remember other kinds of experiences that we represent. In terms of an inch deep, no, I think it's deeper than that. And it's because by queuing into those legislators or whoever else you're speaking to, whether it be a local leader, as Ginger suggested, or a state legislator, by queuing into their experience, you bring up all those great feelings they had, those great memories they had. And that's what deepens the support we have, is making it personal, tying it to their experience. And if you don't know when you walk in to speak with someone new, you know how this works in all of our conversations as human beings. We find out things about each other and then we respond to those. And that's how I think it works best in terms of the conversations you would have with legislators. So in sum, yes, I think it's a mile wide. No, I think it's a lot more than an inch deep. And there are ways that you can continue to deepen that appreciation by having your passion, your sincerity, and maybe a little hook into their history as you speak with them.
Terrific. Thank you, Paul. All right, let's have some questions for these folks or each other or whatever. This is time for you to focus in on areas or opportunities or questions or concerns. So bring it on.
Hey, Ginny, as you're queuing up the first question, I kind of wanted to expand the thinking a little bit. You know, we're here for Advocacy Day and we're going to go into the legislature and make a case for the arts and culture. But advocacy is also all around you. It's in your everyday interactions. It's in your network. It's with your local council. So everything that is being talked about here, I would apply it to 365 days a year.
Very good point. Thanks. Ginevra.
Hi, Ginny. Sorry to keep bugging you with questions.
No worries.
What's most effective? A cold call to let me back up. The Joint Ways and Means Committee. There's nobody from our area there. So anybody that I call on that committee for an appointment is a cold call and out of district. Now, my locals are pretty much enthusiastic about the project, but none of them, you know, they're going to be talking to them in the hallways. So how effective is somebody from Eugene or somebody from Baker calling somebody from Portland who may or may not know anything about us? And what kind of case? Is it a different case that I make to them than I might make to somebody local?
Paul, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I think just to expand out a little bit, there are actually some pretty key members of the large Ways and Means Committee from Eugene. Senator Manning, Senator Beyer. There are also some other key legislators who are part of leadership from Eugene, Representative Nathanson, and the list goes on. Eugene is well represented in the decision-making body that is Salem. However, actually, I think in many cases, somebody from Portland might be not only curious, but also impressed to hear something that they don't know much about, like what you're doing at SHIP. And the excitement that you show can communicate about that program might be new news to them. And frankly, legislators like to learn stuff. And if you bring them something new, that is often actually, in my experience, a very good conversation, even though they didn't know you or anything about you or anything about your organization beforehand. There is, I think, frankly, a pressure on legislators' times. We've talked about that. And so sometimes the constituent from the district is going to get precedence in terms of if time is short rather than the outsider. But I don't think that doesn't mean that means you shouldn't try, because in fact, if you succeed, you might find a very positive reaction. So I encourage you to try.
It looks like we have a question from Sean Andrews.
And
Yeah,
Sean,
thank
before you start, Ginevra, one of the things that Paul said caught my ear. Your comments this morning about using the shed for memorial services. For example, who knew? So if there are things that you're doing that might not be obvious to people, it's something that could be of interest. Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. I was wondering if, Paul, maybe you could opine about what do you think are the greatest legislative hurdles to the priorities of the arts sector, and how might we speak to legislators more specifically about that?
That's a good question, Sean. One of the hurdles is in getting our messages across, and then therefore our priorities adopted, is the noise of the legislative process. And I use that term sort of advisedly. There's just a lot going on. That's why we have to be a little bit different and a little bit more creative in how we approach folks, and a little bit more willing to be passionate in a way that sometimes they're tired of the dry, here's my program kind of description. So we have to distinguish ourselves. But I think that the noise of the legislative process, meaning how many people are being working for their priorities and how many voices are being spoken, is one of the hurdles that anybody has, and it's certainly one of the hurdles that we have. We have a great advantage, however, in that we have a lot of different people from a lot of different places, from a lot of different voices that can help get through to a lot of different legislators. So that's one of our strengths. But the difficulty, I think, is how many things. I remember when I first started in this business many years ago, there was a relatively senior legislator, and he said, Paul, your job is to know, this much about your subject. You need to know everything, because I know about this much about 3,000 different bills that are going to be looked at this year. So that is what I mean by the noise. They have lots of different things, some of which are not very important, not as important as ours, because they're, let's be honest, ours is an important thing for human existence and all those factors that the passion that you have for this subject. So we have to get through that noise.
Looks like we have a question from Kelly Johnson.
Yeah, hi everybody. Ginger, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you're doing at the county and city level to advocate for those funds to pass through to arts and culture.
Hey, Kelly. So no, I think the biggest thing is, of course, it's if you haven't built those relationships now, you're a little bit behind the ball, just because it's depending on your county and where you're at with risk assessment and all that kind of good stuff. Just even getting access to some of them with smaller venues, especially in rural Oregon, our county council chambers is pretty small. So there's that kind of dialogue. Hopefully you've done your work ahead of time and you have built those relationships. I just asked before CARES Act, my property is owned by the city, and I just literally sent the city manager an email and said, if we fail, you're going to get this building back. So could you throw through some money for, like the heating and the cooling and the lights, so that maybe we can stay here, so that you don't have to pay for the heating and cooling and lights and the maintenance. And so they just told me to show up at a meeting, and then they wrote me a check, because it was all scobbed together in a lot of counties. Maybe others have done it more professionally. But I see all this infrastructure money coming, and that's where, I mean, I check about the Americans, the rescue plan almost daily, because I want to know how that money's going to flow down to my city and my county. And I want to be the first person in line with my proposal ready, going, hey, help us out. But that infrastructure money's coming too. And it's got me thinking, do I need to get my board member who's in charge of capital projects going out and checking the sidewalks? What do we need done in the street or parking lots or access? Because that infrastructure money's coming. And how might that help the arts and culture sector? Because lots of us have challenges with that. Then we have Build Back Better. And we don't know what that will be. So, and again, it's just, I just go out and check it every day. It's kind of the constant little habit of, what do we know in this 5 minutes? And like to have JS say the shuttered venues opens tomorrow, that's incredibly important to get through the noise of all the message. So sorry, rattled on. Does that help?
A little bit more detail on that. The 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan is handling money distribution very, very differently than the earlier CARES Act. The earlier CARES Act routed most of the money, not quite all of it, but most of the money through the state government, and the legislature generally in a special committee called the Emergency Board made allocations during the interim last summer. The American Rescue Plan actually has specific defined dollar amounts for every single city and every single county in the United States. There will be a specific dollar amount given to Baker City and a different dollar amount given to Baker County, and that's true of every community in your jurisdiction, in your area. Every single school district is being given a specific amount of money. Every single higher educational institution, public and private, are being given specific amounts of money. But with respect to your city and county, these folks weren't necessarily expecting it. I'm sure they have lots of ideas of how they would like to spend it and how it'd be good for the community. But if you can get in line early, as Ginger points out, maybe your idea is one of the first ones on the list, that you help them spend that money wisely in your community for your projects.
Kate, did you get your question answered, or would you like to follow up?
I did get my question answered through a private chat, although I realize I might not be the only one who could benefit from it. My question was to Ginger as to whether, because I am a queer person who people don't necessarily assume is queer, and so hearing what Ginger said about making sure that if you are part of LGBTQ AI2+ communities, or part of a tribe, or part of any of these other communities, that you really make sure that your voice is heard and represented, made me realize that that's not necessarily something I lead with in these sorts of advocacy conversations. And so I wanted some input on how to bring that up in a way that is meaningful and not contrived.
Terrific. Good. Thanks for sharing that with everybody.
Sure thing.
And I will give you my brief answer, which was come to the space, like what Paul said, do your research on the person you're talking to. Know what their passion points are, their leading things. Sometimes I come into the room as, hi, I represent rural Oregon. Sometimes I say I represent Baker City, Oregon. Sometimes I say I'm here as an arts education advocate. Know your audience and be able to speak with that authentic voice. That was my answer. So.
All right, do we have any more questions for our wonderful panel?
Well, all right. Thank you all so much. Sue, I actually think we're a little ahead of time, but before I hand it back, I'll just tick through the key message points that we want to make sure that we hit with legislators throughout today. First, the thank you to them for working with the emergency board on the CARES Act money, that recognizing the importance of our sector by awarding more relief funding to cultural institutions from the CARES money than any other state in the nation. That, I mean, it's just an astonishing piece of work that they did, and we need to appreciate that and encourage them to keep it going at every level of government, as has just been noted. The budget.
Can I add something there, Jenny?
Certainly, JS.
If you have a story about how those CARES Act dollars that you can deliver quickly, about how it helped you hire people, helped you change lives, a mission moment related to that your portion of that 50 million, that really brings the thank you home, because it makes people understand that I mean, all nonprofits are either in the changing life business or the saving life business, and you know, the arts are about changing and saving lives. So telling those stories are really powerful.
And I'll tell you, JS did a wonderful job of exactly that yesterday when we had an opportunity to visit with Senator Merkley. And in just a couple of minutes, he wove together his experience with PPP money, private philanthropy, CARES Act. It was very well done, and it really did put a face on how you go about being a good steward of both private and public monies. So that was great.
We do have a question from the Little Theater on the Bay that just came through about SVOG. They are a volunteer organization that does, when we put in out initial application, this program seems to be pointed to equity programs that pay their performers. Will there be any opportunity for venues like ours to apply? So since they're a volunteer organization, will they be able to apply? Do we have an answer, Paul?
That's a great question. I mean, we were talking yesterday with Senator Merkley's staff about challenges with SVOG, and this was more specific to the fixed seating requirements associated with SVOG. So, you know, it might be helpful for you to chat with me offline about, or other members of the lobbying team around the challenges you're having around SVOG, to see if there's a way where we can have those conversations with both our legislative staff, but also, you know, I mean, what's been interesting about this is because of Senator Schumer's role as the majority leader now in the Senate, we've also been able to influence legislation in a way that wasn't possible just a few years ago or 6 months ago. So knowing more about that would be helpful.
Okay, so next up is on our agenda is to urge support for increasing the budgets specifically for grants from both the Oregon Arts Commission and the Oregon Cultural Trust, and to replenish funding for the Main Street grant program. We would ask for their support to renew the expiring state tax credits for historic property and film production. Support allocation of the $9.5 million from state coffers for the cultural capital construction projects. And to please update the Oregon State Song using an equitable and participatory process. I think you have all of those top line items included in your packet, some with a little more detail. And if you want to focus on one or, pull one out of the lineup a little bit and spend a couple more minutes on it in some way, feel free to use that list in a way that that you can tailor to your own needs and whoever you may be seeing. We would really appreciate it if you would take a few minutes and circle back after you have your meetings, send a little, summary of the visit, let us know if there's follow-up that needs to be done, or anything, unusual or most interesting that you picked up from your contact, so that we can be building the relationship bank as we go through today. And Jamie, will you be the repository for those notes and comments?
Yep,
Okay.
if you go ahead, and you should all have received an email from me with my contact info. I'll put it in the chat here in just a minute. And if you send those to me, we can compile them. The other thing I would ask is just after your meeting, if you have a thank you card, you could actually mail to the legislators you meet with. It's always nice for them to receive something like that, or an email. But if you have a stationery from your organization, that's a nice touch at the end. We do have one more question from Nikki Price for Paul, if we have time to answer that.
Got plenty of time.
Oh, thanks a lot. I'm sorry to be late. This is kind of a panel discussion, but it also dovetails with this talking point about the OAC budget. And I can always make a case for what good the grants do in my district, in my organization. But I've been struggling to find a succinct sentence or two that explains how people provide the infrastructure that connect the organizations to the funding. Because that's one of the primary goods that I think come from the OAC staff and the Cultural Trust staff, is their ability and their expertise to make things happen for you, help you make things happen for yourself. So you can see my problem. I'm kind of going on and on trying to make my point about, the CARES money that came in last year was distributed fairly and equitably because of the expertise that the Cultural Trust staff had. So I'm wondering what kind of messaging points, quick sentences, could be used to make that point to legislators.
Nikki, just for a point of clarification, are you talking about arts services organizations who distribute the funding?
No, okay. I'm talking about supporting the talking point we were just discussing, which is the goal, the priority to increase the Arts Commission budget. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about not bringing that budget up so that they don't lose positions and they don't lose that expertise, because I know my organization and many others have benefited so much from that staff. To me, retaining staff is a priority, and I would just like to figure out good ways to communicate that.
Well, not to get too much down in the weeds, but I think it's an important factor here that I want to make sure we bring out. There are two sets of budgets. One is the governor's recommended budget, and the Arts Commission was cut in the governor's recommended budget. But the budget that really matters is what the legislature adopts. And that's guided by the co-chairs, the tri-chairs of the Ways and Means Committee, 2 senators and 1 representative. And they just issued their framework. And their framework is to have another piece of jargon, continuing service level funding for all state agencies, which means all current positions plus inflationary costs, both with positions and services and supplies and all the other things that make an agency run. So I don't think it's too, I think that maybe the proper way to phrase this, Nikki, if you're talking to one of the members of Ways and Means, is that we thank the co-chairs for their framework that restores continuing service level to the Arts Commission and all the other state agencies. Now, that's a little bit oversimplification because frankly, there could be shifting between the two and there may be some fine points, but I think we start with it from thanking them that there's enough money to do everything that needs to be done.
Yeah. I wondered about that. I didn't have that information when I testified the other day.
Yeah, I think it's because agencies look at the governor's recommended budget because that's the one that they have to support. We are now happy to move on beyond that to the Tri-Chair's framework budget.
Great.
JS?
Yeah, one of the points we made yesterday with Senator Merkley's staff also was, and it's related to this, and it's because of my conversations with both Madison Cryro at RAC and Brian at the Cultural Trust, is that if there are more federal dollars which are allocated through these local venues, if there could be some funding that would be allocated towards enabling the distribution of the funding, that's another consideration that would be important in how those dollars flow, because we really stressed the Cultural Trust and RAC in how those CARES dollars were distributed quite a bit. So thinking about the infrastructure that supports our arts organizations is a point we made with the senator's staff.
Anybody else? Any lingering questions, comments, worries?
I've got one, Jenny.
Isaac.
I think it's important to recognize we're in the arts and we own venues and we work with theater and we do production. I challenge everybody on the call today to invite whoever you're speaking to in the legislature back to your home turf to enjoy a show. I really think that being human and extending that is so important. And also that, you know, this is a game of chess we're playing. This is a long term and relationships matter. And so establishing a relationship before you need it is probably one of the best things that we can do as a coalition. So be proud of what you do and invite them into your space. If they're going to be visiting your part of town, they should also be visiting your venue.
Oh, thanks, Isaac. And I'm going to get to Gwendolyn in just a second, but this reminds me of a mantra of my friend Sam Brooks, and he always tells his association people to stay ready to be ready. And that's a lot about what we all have to do every single day. Gwendolyn.
Yes, and I've heard so much that I've had a chance to go and do. I actually it feels like so long ago, purchased a piece for this the Shakespeare Festival, and it was at one of our conferences, and then we made our plans and got all of that set up, and then everything closed down. And so I've had, you know, these dreams of the Shakespeare Festival, you know, growing up in La Grande, Oregon, wanting to go to those spaces and doing a lot of the cultural things, because that's part of my own personal experience as an actor and doing voiceover work and doing that work. But however, I am the director of an interpretive center museum, and we're looking at, you know, having our own land to do all of those kinds of work. So essentially what I'm hearing today is a lot about the spaces for theater which are super critical, but I haven't heard many voices from the museum side of the house today and in some of the works we do. And we're all so unique in what our works are. And we come together at this nexus. We are the nexus for that next indicated thing. But I just wanted to do a shout out for the cultural, the museums and the interpretive centers that are part of this work today, that we've got so much that we're building for the future of all of us. And really for me, it's just the analogy of just going fishing for these folks to come into our spaces, not just to our interpretive center. I've got a grantor that has announced that we haven't gotten any money from them yet, but like, we're going to be in your town and we want to go to the site that you're purchasing of 240 acres and your museum that has essentially been closed for a year, and see where you are and what you're working toward and what your plans are and what you're going to in those spaces. And so it's those energies that are coming together in multiple ways. And so I just wanted to put my voice inside of this space today. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Gwen.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Sue,
Yeah.
I think I'm going to toss it back to you.
Thank you, Ginny. That was awesome. We do have a request, Ginger, for the Godfather example that you shared at the OAC meetup. Is that
Well,
something?
no, I don't believe I gave the Godfather. I just emailed Madison. I believe it was Madison who made the Godfather reference at our last OAC. Was that correct, Madison? Is she still here?
Yeah, I'm here. I did, and I can't put it back together. Do you remember, Ginger?
Oh, I don't. It was great.
I think I was there. And I think we all talked about it in a certain way, and it was the idea that you are forming a relationship, you're reaching out to people, and part of that conversation is they say they support you, you say, great, I support you, we're working together. And if you're on board with me, you can expect sometime in the next year a visit from our executive director. Going to ask you for a favor, just one, and you're gonna take that meeting. That's what it means to be on board. And so you kind of, that's how we framed it. Like, there will be a time where you will be visited.
Well, that's not too far off the mark. I like that. Okay, well, we're going to move on to the last parts of the agenda. We're running ahead, so there'll be time at the end if there are more questions. But the next piece is Congresswoman Bonamici, who wanted to join us. And JS, I'm going to let you tee this one up.
You bet. Recently, the CIC board had the chance to meet with Congressman Bonamici over Zoom to discuss our key priorities for federal funding and policy here in the cultural sector here in Oregon. She wanted to be with us today, at least by Zoom, to share her regards and let us know more about what's happening at the federal level. But she also really specifically asked for stories. And so it goes back to the point I was making earlier. It's really important for us to be able to share our stories with legislators, because that's how the work goes from money to reality. And we're all in the reality business of sort of expressing that. So here's a short greeting from Congresswoman Bonamici.
I'm just going to pull it up here, JS. Make sure we can hear it. So,
hello, I'm Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, and I'm glad to be with you, albeit virtually, to talk about
Is anyone getting sound?
No.
We cue it again. We had it at the beginning.
Yeah, hold on a second, man.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici, and I'm glad to be with you, albeit
Any sound?
virtually, to talk about and celebrate the arts and culture and advocacy for them in Oregon. Thank you to the Cultural Advocacy Coalition and the many advocates and artists throughout Oregon who continue to champion the value of the arts despite the continued challenges. The arts have always been an important part of my life. My parents were musical. My mother played and taught piano. My dad played the drums. Parents took my brothers and me to museums and taught us to appreciate music. Arts help us better understand different people and different cultures, give us a way to communicate, inspire creativity, entertain us, preserve cultures and traditions, transform communities, and importantly now, soothe and heal us. As we move forward, building back better, it is critical that the arts and culture are seen as essential to economic recovery. That means investing in the arts and creative industries, which have done so much to boost our economy, and doing all that we can to help the industry get through the challenges of the pandemic. I know we will succeed with your help and advocacy. Thank you for the work you do, and thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Thank you. Thanks, Jordan. Okay, we're coming to the end of our morning, and we're hoping you feel a little better prepared to go out and connect with your policymakers this afternoon. Remember that Jenny went through the talking points there in your packet, and do what you can, do what feels comfortable, and know that we're here. We can follow up to meetings that you have. We can answer questions. We will be here to support your advocacy efforts. Remember that stories matter, and Kendra also made the point that facts and figures matter too. So you'll find in the in your packet, there are some facts and figures about the cultural sector in Oregon and how it's been impacted by the pandemic, and also how it drives our economy in many ways. So feel free to use those facts and figures too. A few final updates from the CAC. First, I want to show you our new face masks, which we're super excited about. They say, because arts and culture are good for your health. That's our Advocacy Day logo. Thank you to Sarah and Lakin Creative. And we have these available if you make a contribution to the CAC, or if your board members or friends do, of over $100, we will send you a mask, or you can purchase one for $20. And you'll find them in some of the gift shops of our board members, and we'll be putting that information on our website. If you are already a member, we encourage you to consider spreading the word and maybe doing something one of our board members has done that we're so touched by, and I hope she won't mind me sharing, but Nancy Golden's way of supporting the coalition is to pay membership fees for smaller arts organizations in her community, so that they can be a part of the network. And that has been great. And remember, you can do that for as little as $50. We are also wanting to just put on your horizon the fact that this fall, we have a brand new Oregon Cultural Trust license plate coming out. And that is being spearheaded by the Oregon Cultural Trust organization, by Brian and his team. But we've had a sneak preview and it is incredible. You are all gonna want one on your electric car. And so please just mark your calendar, because in the fall, we're going to be supporting getting the word out and encouraging people to buy those, because the dollars from those license plates go to support the trust and its marketing budget. They're really critical. Finally, we are revamping our logo and our name. So as we grow forward, it will be very clear that we are the Cultural Advocacy Coalition of Oregon. We have not had Oregon in our name, and as we sign on to national advocacy letters, that's been an issue for us. So we're going to fix that. And again, Sarah's working on a beautiful new logo for the CAC, as well as a revamped and much easier to use website that will have advocacy tools embedded in it. So you'll be able to go to our website and have a much more robust experience. So stay tuned for that. And finally, just a huge thanks to each one of you for taking the time to share your voice today with your policymakers. I hope you've learned this morning, it matters. Every single voice matters. I want to especially thank our board members and our staff, Jamie, Sarah, and Paul Cosgrove, our lobbyist, and all the folks who participated in today's virtual event. And Jordan, thank you for being our Zoom master. I don't know how we would have done it without you. Stephanie, thanks for your performance. Many people gave a lot of time and commitment, so we're really grateful for that. And now that's our wrap, and we still have 20 minutes. So we're happy to take questions or share stories or just connect as a community, whatever is the pleasure of this amazing group of people. Anybody have any?
Sue, I have a thing to posit to this creative group. It's a little off topic, but Ginger brought up something really important about access. As much as we hate Zoom, there was a day where I got to be on a board meeting in Chicago and another one on top of a mountain in New Mexico on the same day. And I wouldn't have been able to get to either one of those under normal circumstances. There is a lot of discussion out there in good think tanks about hybrid meetings. We have tried it. It sucks. We've had it where, you know, half the group's been in the room live and the other half is on a screen. I think it would be something that the creative minds, the video geeks, the tech folks, that we could bring some really important discussion about how to do virtual hybrid meetings that are substantive and nobody's left out. And I don't think anybody, I've been asking around the country, I haven't seen anything. So it's just a next step project.
That is great. A great question, Geneva, because that is what I know our schools are wrestling with too, is if you bring kids back and then you don't have a Zoom program at home, or if you're trying to do hybrid and still have kids at home and kids at school, how do you do that? So I think you're right. There's a real need for some thought around that. Does anybody know of anything or any group leading on that?
I can answer a little bit. So I'm also a board member with the Nonprofit Association of Oregon, and many of our board members come from around the state, but the meetings happen in Portland proper. And it was brought up before COVID happened, in which we utilized BlueJean as the meeting service. And we would have an NAO staff member help monitor a chat, and they would kind of be like the in-person translator in the physical meeting. And then we took over the big screen in our board meeting room so that the video was up for anybody who was in their office in Eugene or Southern Oregon. And so it worked. But I do have to say that we only had maybe 3 board members on that screen. So it wasn't like having 25, 50, 100 people on the screen side of things. And now, as TVC, as Tualatin Valley Creates, starts to plan professional development workshops going back into maybe a in-person virtual element, we're also asking the same questions when we have 25 people logging in. What does that look like? You have a presenter in a physical space and maybe 10 to 20 in a physical space and then 25 plus on a screen. So I would love to know other ideas too.
Something we might be able to start thought circle around and try to bring some resources together. So I appreciate you noting that, and we'll take that back to our board. There's a question in the chat here, Isaac, for you about, and maybe for Carrie, and I think Jonathan's on too, about Portland Art Museum and their equity work and what you appreciate about it. Isaac, are you able to take that?
I'll be brief, and then maybe someone from the Portland Art Museum can jump on here. They spent time developing an equity lens, which drew equity decision-making as far up into their processes as possible. It's kind of a universal tool that they've developed. And what is important here is the outcome. The like interest in moving the needle on equity is threaded throughout their entire organization. I'm just think like every single facet is affected by it. And that's what really stood out for me. And that's why our team here in Eugene has been playing around with their tool to see how it works and how we might adopt it. But I really love for Portland Art Museum to speak to it because they worked hard to get that far.
Carrie, are you?
Yeah, thanks, Sue, and thank you, Isaac. I'm Carrie Birch. I'm the development director at the Portland Art Museum, and I just put in the chat box a link to our equity statement. We've, like Isaac said, we've developed a cross-departmental equity team, and it is a priority of ours. And we would be more than happy to work one-on-one with anyone and your organizations as you develop your own equity tools, equity lenses, and decision-making. It really is a part of every decision that we make at the museum, and so important to our future. So take a look at the link I put in the chat, and I'll also put my email address in there, and please reach out if you want to go deeper on what you and your organizations are working on. We'd love to be a resource.
Thanks, Carrie.
I think I could add one more thing.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. There's a big difference of size of organizations in the coalition on the call here today. Sometimes the bigger organizations just have more bandwidth and resources to do this kind of work. And that's where it's important that we work together. You know, it's certainly okay to borrow, steal, plagiarize. We're all trying to do good work. So I just wanted to emphasize that.
Yeah, Isaac, I totally agree. We all have to support one another. We're all in this together. And it's all about our arts ecosystem that we know remains pretty fragile. So we have to lean on each other.
Thank you. And I will just add to that the CAC now has an equity lens that we borrowed from a lot of different places to build. And we had a subcommittee of our board help build that. And we looked at RAC's work and the Portland Art Museum and other places to do that. In fact, even I think the Oregon Education Investment Board. So lots of resources to pull that together. We can share that if it's not on our website already. I think it might be. Let's see, Kate, I think, did you have your hand up?
I did, yes, thank you. Fuse Theater Ensemble, we're probably one of the smaller theaters on this Zoom call today, and we have done some equity lens work through Matthew Reynolds Consulting that we've really gotten a lot of value out of, and especially for any of the smaller organizations out there that might be a little like about the finances. It's totally doable.
Okay, and thanks, Kate, too, for your comment about maybe using virtual reality technology as a part of how to improve meetings. My kiddo is teaching me about that, and it's wild. Okay, Brian, did you have a hand up? I wanted to make sure we don't miss any comments that are out there.
Yeah, I did. I just wanted to touch back on the virtual meeting concept. I think you all know that the Cultural Trust raised more money in calendar year 2020 than it ever has before. We're at the $5.2 million mark from over 9,000 donors, and it's $600,000 increase over previous years. And I think, and we're doing the research on this right now, but I think the real reason we got such a big bump is two things. One is, we were able to stand up that program to allocate $26 million in relief funding. And the other is that we did over 160 board meeting presentations in a couple of months. So we were able to step into cultural organizations board meetings for first 5-10 minutes quickly explain the cultural trust and then leave and then probably join another board meeting. So we would do 3 or 4 a day. You know, in previous years, we were lucky if we got, you know, over 50 board meetings because of the travel restraints, and our reach across the state was pretty phenomenal. So if you did host us at one of your board meetings, thank you so much for doing that. I actually saw during the presentations that I was making, you could see people pulling out their credit card and going online and doing it right then and there, like kind of the call to action. So I am totally excited, as well as all of us at the Cultural Trust and Arts Commission, to be able to, for the Cultural Trust side, increase the grant making budget. So if you haven't gotten your applications in, get them in. And it could be an exciting year for grant making for the Cultural Trust. So yes, thank you. That's all.
Brian, thank you. And thanks to Leora too for your great leadership. And you guys did such a great job getting those dollars out the door earlier this year. We really appreciate that and your continued advocacy and partnership with us. We are in good partnership. Okay, is there anything else anybody wants to add?
Madeline flagged some good recommendations for next year. Hopefully we'll all be in person, but we'll have to consider some of these if we're doing a joint virtual and in-person advocacy day, in terms of adding some ASL captioning and audio descriptions. And Madison, we will probably be reaching out to you to talk more about that, so we can make sure we include those for next year and in our meetings going forward.
For sure. Thank you, Jamie. All right, everybody, have a fabulous day. Let's be united in our love of arts and culture and heritage and humanities and do great things for this state. Thank you so much.